Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to thank you all for coming today. My name is Alicia Poon. I'm the Curator of Education at the Indian Arts Research Center here at SAR. And I'm really pleased to be here to be able to introduce and honor our 2017 Eric and Barbara Dobkin Native Artist Fellow, Luanne Redeye. A remarkable painter and beadworker, Luanne's goal at SAR was to complete a highly personal project that weaves together narrative, family relationships, and historical trauma. In doing this, Luanne was able to explore familial relationships and how historical traumas can be broken. Luanne is an accomplished artist, having received her MFA in painting and drawing from the University of New Mexico. Her works have been shown at the South Broadway Cultural Center in Albuquerque, at the YMCA Armory in Oswego, New York, and at the Fondazione Gioacchini in Venice, Italy. In addition, she has also been featured in many noted publications, including First American Art Magazine, Native Peoples Magazine, and Imago Mundi. Most recently, one of Luanne's paintings was accessioned into the New York State Museum, where it will go on display in 2018. And another piece is currently being shown in the Rainmaker Gallery in Bristol, England. In addition, she recently completed a spotlight interview with Indian Country Today, and that article will be published shortly, so you can keep an eye out for it. We are going to be so sorry to see Luanne leave us in a few short weeks. But Luanne holds a teaching position at Central New Mexico Community College, and summer sessions are about to start, and our class in portraiture will not teach itself. So we look forward to seeing her career grow and develop in the upcoming years. But for now, please join me in welcoming Luanne Redeye.
Thank you for coming this evening. So I wanted to give you a little bit of my background. So I grew up on the Allegheny Reservation, which is in western New York, so near Pennsylvania. You can see it on the map. And I wanted to mention that, New York State is not one giant New York City. So there are a lot of small towns, and one of the small towns I'm from is Salamanca. I was raised by my grandmother and grew up in a household full of women. So it was me, my grandmother, my aunts and cousins. I now live in Albuquerque, and as Alicia said, teach at C&M, and I know my class starts soon, but after 3 months of this, I don't want to go back. It'll be hard. So as a kid, during the 90s, MTV was my exposure to pop culture. So Soundgarden's Black Hole Sun was my first music video I ever saw, rest in peace. And Beavis and Butthead was actually what inspired me to draw portraits. It's what inspired my interest in portraits. I actually wasn't allowed to watch MTV, but as a kid I was going to see it anyway, so it was very vividly. I remember I was in second grade and saw the episode of Beavis and Butthead, and I just loved it. And after that, I would draw their portraits and then hand them out to my friends. I liked drawing their faces. I liked drawing their characters, but I soon realized that the people I was seeing on the TV, didn't look like me, that they didn't look like the people that I knew, that what I was seeing on TV, didn't look like the small place in New York of where I lived. And it was this awareness that is the foundation of my work. So I paint genre scenes and portraits of people, so I paint them in their everyday life. I use my camera as my sketchbook, just because I'm terrible at keeping sketchbooks, and I'm constantly taking photographs when I go home. So whatever the person is doing in that moment is what I find interesting, because I feel like they're comfortable, they're relaxed, they're who they are. The representation of who they are is important to me, so I want my friends and family and the community that I know to be seen. Sometimes the paintings include specific cultural things, and sometimes they don't. So this is a portrait of my Uncle Steve. So I depict his portrait a lot because I think he has a great face. I didn't know how else to describe that, but I feel like he has a lot of character in his face. So you can see the smile lines around his eyes and his mouth. His nose has been broken like multiple times, so he has a Z shape in it. In his hand, which is hard to see, but he's holding a harmonica, and that's kind of a distinct feature of him whenever he's had a few. So I think I paint his portrait so much because he's the only father figure that I knew. So he's played this role for my younger cousins as well. So I feel like he's a great man. Some of you would recognize this painting from the SAR website and maybe press release. I know they used it quite often. It's a painting of my cousin, Carlene. When I go home, I always stay with my cousin Sheena and her mom. And Carlene, who's the younger sister, she's always over, and she always has her million kids with her. And so I'm in their space, but not as a stranger or as an outsider. So these women welcome me into their home or into their intimate setting, and I appreciate that they take me in when I can't go home. So I took this photo of Carlene feeding her baby daughter, and I painted this scene because I thought it was an important moment. Before I posted any images of the painting, I showed Carlene and I asked her if it was okay to share, because it's revealing, and she was fine with it. She was happy, she was proud. She said, yeah, she's like, I want people to see that I'm a Seneca woman, and I feed my baby with my belly hanging out. That's how she put it. This image is from the same home. This painting has been the hardest to document, so unfortunately it's kind of at an angle, so the lighting looks okay, so I could get the lighting just right. But if you come to the open studio, you'll be able to see it in person. I brought it. So beyond portraits, I also like to paint shelves and dresser tops from the people's homes, because I'm interested in the items they put on these surfaces, because I feel like it's like a symbolic self-portrait for them. So here you can see that my cousin displayed pictures of family, these important milestones, so 16th birthday, college graduation. She put her cornhusk dolls on there as well, and then the Christmas lights, which are up all the time year-round. Yeah. And then this image, I didn't really have anything to say about it. I just wanted to put it up because they're throwing the gun, and I thought it was funny. Which, I see two people giggling. They get it. Another aspect of my work is creating abstracted paintings with the Seneca beadwork designs. I like to have the lines and the shapes overlap or intertwine, and then also the colors and values to blend together. So I see this work as a representation of my view that the designs can evolve, that they can change, and that they blend with my own interests or understanding of what living today is like. I've tried combining the portraits and designs together in painting, but it never quite worked out. I felt like it wasn't successful, for me, successful. But when I learned silkscreen printing a couple years ago, I found that the graphic quality of the medium kind kind of brought the portrait and the designs together seamlessly. I hand paint and hand cut the stencils because I find that process more intuitive, and also I never got the hang of photo emulsion and exposing the screen. So this is a portrait of Corn Planter, who was a Seneca war chief in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and he's also my 7th great-grandfather. So another example of the silkscreen prints. Sounds like I'm saying print, like half-wood prints. Okay. I wanted to show this print so that you could see the designs, because I use these motifs really often in my work, especially the domed shapes. So those would be the red shapes. And I just want you to keep those in mind for later, because I'll come back to it. I'll reference it again with a later work. Okay. So I will show the frames, so the project I did here at SAR, in a couple slides, but I wanted to stop and talk about this writing from a notebook that I kept in 2011. Before I started putting, the physical parts of this frame series together, I had this idea in mind for years, or I don't think you could call it an idea, it was just a bunch of words I wrote down in 2011. So then I didn't know if these words would even, leave the page. I didn't know if they would even become an artwork, and I feel like at the time I probably wasn't ready to explore what they meant. So it just stayed as this, idea in the notebook. So I feel like I can't explain what I wrote down because I'm still trying to understand their meaning. I'm still in process or progress with the work right now. But I know at the time I was thinking of a specific person and then what has shaped our relationship. So I want to emphasize that the frame series is about me and my family, but I understand that the issues, of alcoholism, violence, illness, poverty, neglect, these are things that affect a lot of communities. So, while every, family is different, every person is different, I still ask the question, how many others share my story? So the frame series is very personal and probably reveals a lot about myself. So you're about to get to know me very well, or a part of me. So you're probably wondering, what took 5 or 6 years for me to finally start. And I feel like the answer is I wasn't ready. So looking back now, I know that I didn't have the vocabulary or the technical ability or maybe the emotional understanding to know what it took to make this work. So in essence, I feel like I needed to grow, and I think I did, hopefully. So this has been building up over time, but the event that finally pushed me to make this work was pregnancy and then the birth of my son. So I have a shameless brag because he's so cute. So I know it's natural to have worries when you have children, but my worries also included, rethinking my entire childhood, which is something that any person, pregnant or not, probably shouldn't stress over. So before Elliot was born, I wondered, what sort of relationship I would build with him, and that got me thinking of the relationships that I have with people in my life. That good or bad, how did these people impact who I am, and then by extension, what other events or happenings shaped our family. And thinking about this brought me back to those words that I wrote in 2011. So my family has experienced, alcoholism, violence, illness, but other things like nurturing or teaching, and of course love. So I thought of these themes, which is what I've been calling them, and realized that maybe now I am ready to explore what they mean to me, and I wondered, would these bad themes affect Elliot as they have for generations in my family? Sorry, I lost my place. So in creating these frames, I don't consider them just art. It's me. I'm trying to process or understand kind of everything. For this new work, I decided to use beaded picture frames to represent the subject. Beaded frames and the raised style of beadwork is distinctive to the Haudenosaunee. A quick history, very quick. The frames would be made specifically for Victorian tourists and sold in places like Niagara Falls, but eventually the frames were incorporated back into the community. So the artisans, of that time adapted this form with their own, Seneca or Mohawk or Tuscarora aesthetic, and then I believe that the style of beadwork is an expression of the culture. So I wanted to reference this, significant cultural art, with my current work, with my idea or my frames. I did that because I feel like it would show that the idea is important, that what's behind it is important. Excuse me. Just a quick side note. So I have to say that while going through my notes and going through the presentation, I realized that things get kind of heavy and a little sad, and I'd like to think that maybe this meme doesn't apply, but it probably does. So I'm not trying to make light of a serious illness. It's just if I'm talking about my family members, I'm putting their life out there, talking about their troubles, that maybe I should acknowledge my own. So the first frame of the series, and one you've seen on the postcard if you received it. So there are 5 frames, and each frame is meant to show a different person. It's meant to show my relationship to them, and then what theme or themes have influenced our relationship. So this frame is actually for my biological mother, Pam. So I never knew Pam to be a loving or caring person. She had me when she was 18, and then as an infant left me to be raised by my grandmother. There was a time when I was younger, maybe from like 4 to 7, they had her, Pam and my grandmother were in a custody battle. So during that time, I did have to live with Pam and her ex-husband. There was domestic violence in the home, and then in turn, Pam would take her frustrations out on me, so like emotional and physical abuse. So it wasn't a good time, and unfortunately, it's a time I remember very well. So now as an adult, Pam and I don't have a mother-daughter relationship. And as much as I try to get rid, of these instances of, trauma and neglect and her alcoholism and drug addiction, I still carry those things with me, and I feel like kids who come from those homes probably can say the same thing. So I wanted the frame to represent how I feel. The red pieces you see sticking into the frame are porcupine quills. The use of the quills is intentional to reference the qualities of the porcupine. So when a porcupine is threatened, it raises its hair, on its back and butt area, but to reveal the quills. So I use that metaphor for myself, that I'm protecting myself from this person. So that's why I have the barbed, sharp points sticking into the frame. So I'm protected and you're protected as the viewer. I chose the red quills on the black surface just for its visual impact, and then also the colors or the emotions that the colors can evoke. I feel that the color adds a heightened awareness to the act of the quills. And the title of the frame is another component, so I chose to take something that the person said to me and then make that part of the title. So I used a statement or a quote that I felt paralleled the visual of the frame. So here, part of the title, hopefully you can read it, says, "Now who's going to protect you?" So this was a statement that Pam said to me during her mother's wake, or my grandmother's wake. And she said it with all intentions to hurt, and it did. And it took a lot of energy to not react badly. But this idea of protection is something I showed in this work, but then wanted to carry through to another, which I'll show soon. So inside of the frame is a collage of photographs to add context. So Pam and her mom had a similar history of abuse and neglect, and I asked myself, how did these cycles between parent and child start? And then another question, how can these cycles be broken? And then even further, it's like, where did the alcoholism and violence and other things stem from? I don't know if it's the answer, but I looked to my community's history. So I looked to an event that resulted in the removal of families from their original homes. So this was the building of the Kinzu Dam in 1965. The people view the building of the dam as an act of colonialism because the effects of the forced removal, the loss of land, are still felt today. And I wondered, would have our narratives turned out differently if there was no removal, if there wasn't that trauma? So in the collage, I included an image of my great-grandmother's house before the dam was built. And then in the background, behind the house, is a picture of the Allegheny River. So the river flows through my reservation, and then the banks of this river flood the area where the house used to stand. The two figures in the foreground are of Pam and her ex-husband, but because of our history, I just painted over their face. I was like, just get rid of them. And I felt like this was another form or act of protection. I need a drink really quick. I kept the theme of protection going with this next frame, but in a different way. So here I'm not protecting myself, but asking how I can protect my son. So it's important for me, for him to be connected to the culture and the land, yet be safe from the cycle, or the cycle that has affected my relationship with Pam and then her relationship with her mom. I chose to add this image of my cousin Sheena, and she's holding Elliot when he was a week old. So I'm very close to Sheena, and when I look at this image, I see and I can tell that it'll be more than just me that will protect him. So actually, Elliot was born close to Columbus Day in 2015. So this date, and its meaning added to my already growing need to make this work. I feel that parts of the series point to the question, what does survival mean by adding a new generation to the family in the face of continued effects of colonialism? And I think the answer is different for everyone, but I feel that this series of frames is part of my answer, that maybe the answer starts with Elliot, or it starts with this frame. This frame is made with one of my silk screen prints of Corn Planter. So every year the community holds a picnic for his descendants, to celebrate his legacy and his family. And now Elliot is part of that legacy. Sorry, I had food before, now I'm burping. I told you, Alicia. So, looking closer at the collage inside the frame, I feel like you can see the content on their face. He feels safe. In the background, behind them, I included the boundary map of the relocation homes after the Kinzu Dam was built. So people had their homes built uphill because of the flooding, and when elders would speak of their new houses, they would say it never felt like home. So the red square is actually the lot that my great-grandmother's new house was built. So this was the same house that I grew up in. So I made this frame for my grandmother. Because beaded frames are traditionally made to hold pictures of loved ones, I wanted to follow that and then make this frame with obvious intention of care and effort. Being raised by my grandmother, I learned to be responsible and respectful and caring, and she showed me how to dance the mashed potato. But with all my happy memories of our time together, she did live the majority of her life with schizophrenia and alcoholism and diabetes. So she quit drinking when I was very young so that I could live with her permanently, and she was really proud of that sobriety. Unfortunately, her success of overcoming addiction was overshadowed by the stigma that she received from family for her mental illness. Because help wasn't there, she would retreat to her bedroom and then yell at the voices, and sometimes she would hit herself or punch holes into the wall. So those were definitely scary times, especially for a kid who feels helpless, doesn't know what to do. But even though she was suffering, she was never unkind or abusive to me. So she took care of me, but when I was in high school, her health got worse, and then I had to take care of her, or help take care of her, and then she passed away in 2005. So I saved some of her belongings, including a few pieces of her clothes, and I actually used her flannel nightgown for the background of this frame. So it has taken me over 10 years to finally use her image, especially in a meaningful way. The figure on the left, or your left, your left, is my gram as an older woman in her 50s. And then the figure on the right is of her as a younger woman in her 20s. And just by her expression, I feel like that you can tell a lot has happened in those 30 years between. But in both images, I feel like I see the same person, that even through the physical illness, she still had a sense of humor. And even through her mental illness, she was still really kind. Behind her is the relocation home. So this is where she lived most of her life. And again, I wanted to continue that thread of the Kinzu Dam. In the red spot is her bedroom. So this frame represents my dad, who was absent most of my life, or for half of it. He soon left after I was born, and although he lived on another reservation that was 45 minutes away, the Cattaraugus Reservation, I rarely saw him. And I actually used to think that my Uncle Steve was my dad, because he was the only male figure I knew and was close to. And it wasn't until I was about 12 or 13 that my dad made any attempt to get to know me. But the relationship that we were making was more like big brother and little sister. I would visit him every summer when I was a teenager, but I felt that he didn't know how to be a father to his only child. And I realized that that's the same relationship he had with his own dad. So later, he did have more children, and he would be described as a great father. And my dad died in 2012 at the age of 46 from a heart attack. And what I had been feeling for those then 27 years was like kind of bubbling at the surface. And the sadness I felt wasn't because I was close to him and I lost him. It was for this, father that I never had. The frame is meant to be partially finished, so I wanted parts of the beadwork to appear as if they're falling apart. Our relationship never fully developed, and I wanted the frame to have that same quality. So at the beginning of the residency, 3 months seems like a lot of time, but it's not. And so I unfortunately didn't get to make an image to put inside the frame, or even title it. But I have a process picture. So the process of making this frame meant taking a couple different approaches. So in some areas, I would only bead so far and then stop, leaving it as it was. And then in other places, I would finish the beadwork, but then go back and cut the thread and then tear the beads out. And then when I did that, you can see the foundation, especially under the bird, what's underneath. Okay, so the idea for the final frame started with a phrase from that same 2011 notebook that I mentioned earlier. And during this time, I wasn't in a good place, so that even though my grandmother passed away in 2005, that pain from her passing, comes and goes. I have ups and downs. And this quote is from one of the downs. So when I wrote this, I had just finished grad school at UNM, took a trip to the Grand Canyon with my cousins to celebrate. So there were good things happening, but it still felt like I had nothing because of that heartache I was feeling. Now I don't feel like that. I'm on one of the ups. And because this final frame is meant to represent me, I wanted it to reflect my new understanding of all these parts that have made such a big influence. So I wanted to keep the phrase or the word air like air, but give it a new context. So it's no longer about pain. So the forms, I think the forms and designs are meant to show a larger connection to cosmology, creation story, but it's also shows a little bit of vulnerability in myself. So I created the foundation of this frame using a vellum paper. It was durable enough to hold the beadwork, which can be heavy, but also transparent to allow light to show through. So my overall design of the frame includes half circle shapes that reference the sky dome from the Seneca creation story. And if you remember those abstracted paintings or that print, I carried that, domed shape into this work too. So after a short time into my residency, I realized the domed shapes I was using looked like the cloud designs I was seeing on the pottery and paintings in the IARC collection. I looked closer at the work in the collection and was lucky enough to see the curated art displayed by Nina Sanders. And my understanding of the designs is still very limited because I'm not from the culture, but I am aware of the importance of water and the power it has to give life. And I consider the life in my frame represented by the abundance of florals or flowers. So I chose to create 3 main flowers. So each is a different color and is meant to symbolize a different person that I'm close to. So the blue rose is for my grandmother, the green flowers for my cousin Sheena, and then the purple flowers for Elliot. I decided to leave the florals around neutral, so just the gray and silver, so that the main parts would be emphasized. So before moving into the final work, I wanted to show a couple process pictures in making this frame. So surprisingly, it wasn't the most difficult, but it was the one that required the most planning and patience. Because the material is essentially a thick paper, I had to be precise in where I brought the needle back up. So to help me see where the needle was, I set up these lamps on top of the dining table, which was my workspace, and then under the dining table. By doing this, you can see in the image on your right that I could clearly tell where the needle was and then, push it through the paper. But even with my planning and accidents still happened. If I poked the paper too much or if I tugged the thread too hard, it would tear. Luckily, this hole was the worst that happened, and I was able to just cover it up, so you don't even see it now. So finally, the last painting. And please come to the open studio, because it looks so much better in person. I couldn't get a good photograph of it. So the frames for this new body of work are meant to have corresponding paintings to add more imagery and context. So this painting is the sister to the frame that I just showed. So the people that I'm close to, so those who have influenced me, appear in this painting, and then also those larger events that have affected us. I wanted to take those teachings I learned from my grandmother, and then my friendship with my cousin, and sort of the change that happened when I had Elliot, and I wanted to show them in this painting. So I took old photographs of me when I was younger, of me and my grandmother, of my siblings, my aunts, and I placed them under the skin and clothes of my figure. So this was to show that these good parts are a part of me, and now I'm sharing them with Elliot. So like my earlier paintings, we're in an everyday setting. So this is actually inside the King residence up the hill, and it's just me and Elliot together. I do have some details and close-ups. So I used a gel photo transfer technique to apply the images. I felt like just gluing the paper to panel might not have been stable enough, might not have held up to the layers of oil paint on top. The transfer technique I felt was very hard to control, and I'm all about controlling the paint, and it was very frustrating. So some times it went perfectly, and other times it went horribly. So you can see where some of the images broke apart in the process, but I decided to leave it like this because it felt similar to how we remember things. So if you have a memory, it's fuzzy, it's not whole, there might be parts missing. Before showing some more detailed shots, I have a video of the photo transfers. So I wish I could do a demo right here because it's hard to explain, but essentially I'm taking an acrylic medium and putting the photo face down onto the panel, letting that dry, and then using water and rubbing to remove the paper, and it leaves the image behind. So I'll show it. So this was after I applied the image, and now I'm removing the paper backing. Sorry, it's shaky. It was hard to go like this and have my phone up at the same time. So, part 2. So the paper has to be removed in layers so that you don't rub too hard and remove the image. So as the paper dries, you get it wet a little bit more, and then keep rubbing, and then kind of make your way down the layers until you get back to the photo. This was the only one that went perfectly. That was the best. Yeah, Tony the Tiger is awesome. And then the final process. I know it felt very cathartic. I actually liked the feeling of just rubbing the paper. There was something about it that felt nice. So another detail. So this is like, I don't know what the previous detail looks like now with paint on it. So here you can see I let the paint cover up some of the photographs because I felt like some things I would still like hidden or private. But in other areas, I let the photos peek through. Another detail, I drew up a pattern with the beadwork designs and then transferred that as an underlayer to the couches and rugs in the photo. So this is the panel after the photos have been transferred, but before I applied the paint. And I actually sat in this state for like 2 weeks because I was nervous to get started. This process of the transfers is new to me, and I felt like the process of the painting was like falling down the stairs or tumbling down the stairs, and I was just hoping I would land on my feet. The painting's still not done. I have a couple more flights to go, but it was a tough balance to know when to add more paint or less paint. And my style of painting is a lot of layers, building the details slowly, and then just blending the heck out of everything. And so it was difficult to resist that urge to keep applying more paint. Another detail, there were a lot of ugly points in the painting where I didn't want anyone to see it. It's like look away, don't come into the studio. And I redid my portrait 3 times because I just wasn't happy with it. And here in this example is the first pass I did of Elliot. And in this, I felt like things got really nerdy, and his dad was really happy, but I'm not a Star Trek fan, so I said, no, that's not happening. So this is the end of my presentation, and I wanted to use this moment to thank the people that I've met here, so at IARC and SAR. They've been really helpful. And I'm grateful to have received this fellowship, and I hope that the friendships that I made here will last a long time. So thank you. Yeah, 30 minutes.